Rho had kept count of every day we'd been in the zone. This, they imagined, was more accurate than going by the calendar. I considered neither to be accurate, and privately noted the various discrepancies between different methods and different points of measurement. Therefore, when the door to our cell opened for the final time, it was between 352 and 390 days since we arrived, from a certain point of view at the very least. It was long enough that Rho had got some new and wild ideas about their powers. Based on the massive ruckus a few weeks back, and subsequent diminishing of Duty's ranks, a chance to escape seemed to be on the cards. The complication was that they had all of my gear somewhere, including the artifacts. There was no point going for the power plant without at least the bubble, or the radiation would be lethal. So, I wanted to go from imprisoned for endangering mankind and such, to walking free, fully armed, even more so than when we were captured. This was going to be one hell of a parole hearing. A young dutier in a black pullover took us down the hall and out into the street. The tight skyline of industry boxed us in, and the road was divided into neat sections with sandbags. When we'd first arrived, they'd been manned, directing loners from the south to come stay at their free guest houses. Propaganda was the price. We'd seen the numbers drop off on our daily march to the latrine, and the nightly crackles of gunfire aimed at blockade runners went extinct with them. Most of the lights were not replaced after the last emission pushed the whole belt 100 meters further out. Looking around, I judged that in the dark, you could probably sneak right through Duty's front line without anyone noticing. Excellent news. It had been 6 weeks since our last meeting with Colonel Petrenko. He ran the show through its ups and downs. He was one of the first people to enter the zone in the early days, back when he was Captain Petrenko of the Spetsnaz. He and his company were trapped by an emission and left for dead, so instead they founded Duty, horrified at what they found in that early zone. It was only thanks to their tireless efforts that the zone is as safe a place as it is today, with its long line of fortifications and outposts along this industrial belt. So their cheerful recruitment pitches went. It was our tireless efforts that materialized the biggest breach this Iron Curtain had yet seen, and ruined it all. So their show trial indictments went. Petrenko's command room was in the cellar of an old machine shop. It was all bare gun-grey walls and rough concrete floors, dotted with square pillars. He had a bed, a desk, and a map of the zone from after the first major border expansion, a memory of a simpler time. Armoured guards filled the corners like pot plants, and the man himself stood in front of his desk in the middle with his hands behind his back. As usual, there was no greeting and nowhere to sit. "There's no longer any reason to withhold information from us," Petrenko stated. "You should be forthcoming now. Do you agree?" "Absolutely, sir," Rho chirped. "Both of you?" "Absolutely, sir," I moaned. "The Institute of Extraterrestrial Cultures is willing to take you away, but you are not free to go." "Wait, take us where?" I asked. "Do not talk. It has been determined that you are not a mutant in the strict sense of the term, being that you are human. I think both of you are human, even." "Thanks," Rho nodded. "You talk again, you talk," Petrenko lamented dramatically. We had to wait for this to be over to see if a point was coming. "The danger to the world that the zone represents is greater than ever before. It can destroy everything, and we know from experience that given enough time, it will. The responsibility for this falls largely on stalkers, and when they die, it is inherited up to you. I want to tell you, Rho, that your powers are nothing to be ashamed of. You said before that you didn't know what they were. I understand that you feel we are too strict for you to speak to us. I want you to feel that this is not the case." Petrenko stared intently. I believe his declaration of desire was pulling double duty as the method of achieving it. We pretended to feel comfortable to see what he would say next. "You can control anomalies, can't you?" With the strong sense that there was only one correct answer to this, I egged Rho into nodding.
"You are lying!"
Petrenko shouted that last word and flew around to face his desk.
"I thought you wanted me to lie,"
Rho was quick to say.
"Tell me the truth. We have to seal off the zone now, completely. There's no sense waiting any longer or pretending that moderation is worthwhile. You must help us."
"Then you'll turn us over to the government, is that right?" I asked.
"That is the only way out of the zone now, if you want that twisted heart of yours to still be beating."
"His heart's fine," Rho countered lamely.
"You must make stalking impossible. Seal off the inner zone with your powers, Rho,"
Petrenko insisted, suddenly coming back around to us and stepping forward with a passionate clap of his withered hands. When we'd spoken previously, he'd been substantially less dramatic. I didn't see any empty bottles around the place, but the looks I was getting from the guards held open secrets.
"You want me to change the pattern of the anomalies,"
Rho said plainly.
"You want me to summon aliens to guard the zone, kill everyone, end stalking for good, using my powers, and then you'll send us to the government. I understand."
"What does the IEC want with us?" I asked.
"They want you to be alive, if that's what you're asking,"
was the sneering reply.
"No, I meant what exactly."
"That's their business."
"It's my business too."
"The way you're talking, you're planning what to do with your reward already." "So, we have a deal here, don't we?"
"I would be delighted,"
Rho said with a strange bow. I played along with what might have passed for a polite stretch of the lips. Petrenko looked happy, although had nothing to say. "We will go there then?" I prompted.
"Well, how does it work?"
Petrenko asked. I took the liberty of filling in this blank check by claiming we would need to visit the new zone to summon the aliens. The only problem was that it got Petrenko back to his doubts.
Have you ever... What are they like, these aliens?" he asked with embarrassed evasion.
"They want everyone to get along," Rho nodded without missing a beat. I heard some laughter escape the corners.
They will kill the stalkers?"
"Yes. They don't know they're doing it. It's natural. You'll be able to retire, Colonel. Wouldn't that be nice?" There was a touch of bedside manner to Rho's comforting, and that was the Colonel's secret weak point. I couldn't believe Rho got it so quick. Then again, Rho was the chosen one. I saw a genuine smile challenge the Colonel's face and watched him give out orders. His eyes were elsewhere. I wonder where he wished he was instead of here. To think anyone would want to leave the zone. I should not mock this man, for the ease with which we tricked him was so great that we hardly realized we were running a con in the first place. Our imprisonment on admittedly quite true charges was reversed with the same speed and barbarity with which it began. And like its beginning, it concluded with us surrounded by armoured dutiers treating us like cargo. I had my old backpack, Precious Annie with 5 magazines, painted glossy black, the Browning, in worse condition than it used to be, but certainly the same one, my vest, and my rotting pack, with the alcohol removed. Someone had stitched up the tears in the vest, including stitching closed the wide pouches for the eye and the bubble. I expected them to be empty. However, the wriggling of my happy children commenced the moment the inside hit my chest. I tore the threads off to see the little guys. The eye was as small as my fingernail, starving I suppose. The bubble didn't know what was going on. That they had survived a stay in a duty locker was remarkable, for they usually buried artifacts in cement if they came to light in the headquarters. Yes, with the same fervour the military executed trespassers, I expect. My thanks go out to whichever crafty stalker stitched my friends away for a rainy day. Likely they'd already taken the secret to their grave, and I too was happy to keep quiet about it around our new chaperones. The Colonel had brought out his first platoon for us, which might also be called the last platoon. Among them was a certain lieutenant named Krieger. As we were marched along the tarmac roads snaking through the belt, he said, "I sent you to Clear Sky back then to get you out of situations like this. Didn't know I was looking at a walking anomaly. Should have put a bullet in you, eh? No offense."
"None taken,"
Rho chirped. Reminded by Krieger's words, I produced the red bullet he had given me on our first day and returned it. He gasped and claimed that we were remarkable stalkers, taking the little thing like it was a childhood pet returned to life. With your power, I suppose you didn't need it, he said. I decided not to tell him that no one had any idea what the significance of it was, including me. I think I passed a test, although that's not to say it had any impact on our fate. We were still effectively imprisoned by the armed posse in shelling us. We walked on under a dazzling white sky until the factories around us had stooped to mere workshops and train sheds. There were workers' shelters all over the place, and the road was thin. The dutiers were more on guard. There were mutants of various breeds skulking about these buildings. They were dispatched as professionally as is ever done in the zone. There was also talk of patrolling around for loners trying to sneak north. Do what you have to do. I need more time anyway, Rho said. The cheek. Then it was back to whispering to me about possible gaps in their armoured perimeter that we might sneak through. The zone will give us a chance if we stay out here long enough, I bet, I said. It definitely will. Remember my powers? Nope. That's fine. I can do it without you. Waiting for something? The powers. Yeah? I have to wait for them to work. Of course, how silly of me. And what is the schedule for today's powers looking like? I think ET will fit me in soon. These aren't really your powers if you have to compete for bookings, are they? What do you know about it? Literally nothing, and I stop short of calling you a liar because you're such a good person most of the time. Ah, thank you. That's what they call trust. I don't think that's right. Trust me, bro. Wouldn't dare do anything else, Rho. Believe it or not, Rho seems to have some kind of plan. Or at least they did something that could plausibly have led to the chaos that ensued shortly. I believe their scheme began when Krieger took us to stand on a catwalk that bent up onto the roof of an overgrown warehouse. Inside, the dutiers were shooting down the street at a band of squatters flitting around a half-finished office construction site. In other words, it was break time. From the roof we could see the tops of Yantar metalworks in one direction, the chimneys above the duty headquarters in the other, and in between the empty fields and forests of the inner zone. The old inner zone. There was a trick to the vista that duty claimed to be the first to work out. Krieger held up a slice of glass, no larger than a credit card, and laid across it a dark film. He laughed as he looked through it, then handed it to me. Taking a look, there was nothing about the horizon that looked the same as before. The trees had no leaves. There were cliffs, almost mountains here and there, and to my left the skyline of Poliska was visible. There was black fuzz on the horizon that danced when observed. Don't look at it, Rho immediately said, dead serious. I complied. This is the challenge we face, gentlemen, Krieger said, handing the glass to his goons. Rho, I guess I mean you, he added. That's what we need to seal off. And since you put it all here in the first place, you better have some ideas. I understand, Rho nodded. I saw a smile shoot by. Krieger must have figured Rho was thinking about it and left it at that. Instead, he declared it was time for lunch, which was provided for us too. A workplace with perks, eh? Disappointingly, they gave us the same stick of bread and roll of inscrutable sausage we'd been given every day in prison. I later found out it was the ration for the duty grunts, who made up more and more of duty as a whole after the influx of loners in recent months. Below us, between grey buildings and pillows of zone moss, the air was shaking. This is what we need. They're not going to pass through here, are they? Krieger said. I shrugged, which was the correct answer as usual. So, Rho, the Colonel said you could do something? What can you control? He wants me to call in ET, wipe all paths clean. It might kill us too, Rho said. The other dutiers were certainly listening now. Hell, so was I. No need to be hasty. What exactly is the process here? Krieger asked. The aliens cannot communicate information to each other because they all know everything already, Rho said with a hint of sadness. These days they don't even know how to tell us anything. Still, I can get their attention by giving them thoughts they can't possibly predict. That's why it has to be me. So, what does that mean? Krieger said. A rather predictable thought, eh?
We'll get somewhere with a large number of ETs. I'll call out to them. I will make a deal,
Rho said. A deal? You just tell them to remove the zone, Krieger burst out.
In exchange for what? We can't remove everyone whose thoughts they don't like, can we?
Rho pouted. What? I don't get this at all. This isn't... Are you going to get us all killed? Or yourselves? Krieger asked. Of course we don't want that, I lied. It's a long shot, but that's what the Colonel wants to try. If it doesn't work, then things are still fucked beyond repair anyway. And if we can remove the zone, I promise I'll ask. The aliens might not care at all, right? Rho nodded emphatically. The Dutiers didn't know what to do, which is where being a pseudo-military outfit comes in useful. We do whatever we thought the Colonel told us to do, no matter what mania he might be going through. It worked. The nearby loners got shot, the Dutiers cut the jacket arms off the corpses to claim the kills, then we started shuffling through the alleys towards some unsafe ground. We clambered through empty trains and edged around heaps of scrap. There were several shaking patches, but not enough for Rho's continuing charade. A green mucus was floating around the area like a fairy, shimmering against any surfaces it touched as it turned them to thin smoke. The sound of wind came and went, never with any movement of the air to show for it. Rho wanted to go deeper, and no one else knew any better. A Dutier used 3 grenades to knock down part of a wall and get us into a yard. What looked like a muddy unloading bay from the outside was revealed to be a jungle, defying the lifelessness of the area around it. Roofs of buildings stuck up from mushy ground a few inches. Burly brown stems, twice as thick as tree trunks, created a mesh above us. I saw an artifact on one of them, although I didn't have the Veli's machine to confirm it was physical. The green liquid fairies were carrying on their business all around, and right away a duty grunt found out that touching them melted clothing and skin.
Stay close to me, really close, in single file too, step in the footprints,
Rho commanded. They were right. There were footprints in the mud leading ahead of us through the hole we'd only just made. Duty complained about this, and Rho assured them that this invisible rainforest had a great connection to the aliens. I was beginning to believe that Rho actually knew what they were talking about, and I don't say that lightly. There were 22 of us in all, Rho and I at the front. 7 made it through the hole in the wall before Rho stopped us. I looked back. The hole was shaking around, and there was no one on the other side. Rho began, looking to me in panic. The crash of water upon rocks sounded. The aliens were here. The way back was washing away in the waves, and the rearmost 2 Dutiers shone a brilliant orange for a moment. Krieger, next to me, asked what was happening. I gave an honest answer. I have no idea. The jungle crashed down around us amid a shockwave that flattened everything. We would have been crushed had the trunks not disappeared during the fall. We were returned to an urban landscape that quaked at us on all sides. The Dutiers outside were there again, and the aliens were gone. The 2 guys who'd been caught were spinning in the sky, and we all knew they'd be staying there. The clouds were yellow, and the sun was pink. An emission. We all had questions for Rho, and Rho had something to say to me. Run! We turned and bolted away from the Dutiers. With no jungle in the way, there was a clear route that curved around a shed and followed a stretch of collapsed prefab wall beside a ditch. It was a straight line with no cover. I was shot twice by whoever it was who tried to follow us. However, we were running into open ground in the middle of an emission. It would be reasonable to assume no pursuit was necessary. Rho seemed fine with it all, or at least was able to speed along with cool ease. My body was getting lighter, and the sky brighter. We have to go back inside, I bothered to point out, but Rho knew far, far better. I followed them to the end of the trench, scrambled up an embankment of black spoil, then got into a steady run along a flattened hilltop. Bomb craters full of water were vibrating so hard that handfuls of liquid were levitating above the toothy surface. Rho, it's too far, I said. Rho was thinking of going to Yantar, which we could see ahead of us. It was probably a mile away, albeit only half as far if you tilted your head towards the power plant. There was only the running now, and no arguing about it. Like in our first dash of this kind, the constant quaking of the ground didn't upset our pace at all. Even when the ground moved below you meters at a time, it was always back in place when your foot fell. Thanks, E.T. The problem was on the inside. Imagine that you were a candle, with a wick tunneled right through you. As I ran, it felt like the wick was being pulled from the top of my head, oozing out of a rupture. Then it was more like I was suspended on the wick and the weight of my body was sliding away from me. I felt that the wick was the strongest thing that could be, and that what I saw was simply the terrain over which the entire universe was hovering, clasping me to it preciously. My legs were pedaling against the nothingness the world was revealed to be. The hurt from the beginning left me. I saw my wick entangled into the universe around me. It was very small, all told, and it was, all told, there. I could feel the other side of it, where it was twisted tight. The warmth I felt coming from that place. Indeed, the wick slipping through me was burning hot, and my body was crushing and cold. I stopped noticing anything except this growing difference. My body was far away, though. Rho was right in front of me.
"There's a missing piece. You made this, didn't you?"
they said. They were pointing at their own head. No wick, no chain, no tangle. I reached out as if there was one.
"You can't endure this. You haven't got your wish. I am sorry,"
Rho said. The universe softly pulsed away, and I fell in all directions for a moment. Then I was tasting metal and bleach. "He's not a zombie," a voice insisted. I was pulled around. "Get the antibiotics. We'll try the new method." I managed to picture the inside of the Blin. We had made it. Or at least one of us had. Rho sat beside me as I lay on a table, looking absolutely fine, the monster. I dare not think what I looked like.
"Like a zombie,"
was Rho's best description, which was more than enough for me. Everything was still shaking around, and the eye hummed on my chest. Thanks. The beautiful universe went to sleep, and took me with it. I woke up and grumbled that I'd been allowed to sleep until midday. Then I noticed the date. I'd been in that cot for 3 days. Rho said I'd actually gotten up a few times and pottered about, of which I have only their word as evidence. "You should have woken me. What if duty came for us again?" I scolded them.
"They did, but they got bought,"
Rho winked.
"You bribed them?"
"Not me, the cats. They're still around then.
There are lots of new ones. They've been arriving every day."
"You've been keeping a close ear on it all."
"I can feel it."
"Ah yes, with your powers, that right?"
"More or less."
"And the emission was your doing?"
"More or less."
"It's less, isn't it?"
"You should know. What do you think?"
"Rho, you're here to do the thinking for me. Surely you've worked that out by now."
I knew it. It's always been that way, but hearing you say it is nice."
"So why did the cats bribe duty?"
"It wasn't a bribe. They bought us. Bought our services from our captors."
"A wreck with a gun and a little punk who claims to have magical powers. That's a choice hire." I pulled myself out of the cot.
"Oh, just shoot yourself if you really don't think so, bro."
Yeah. Guess I'll go find out what this is about myself." It was about Rho. What else could it be about anymore? Rho had gained a reputation around the Blin as a living artifact, the chosen one, the strange one no one was allowed to speak to unless their manager was around. I was included in the price, conveniently enough. The international mercenaries, the Carbon Cats, had covered the interior of the Blin compound in tall black tents, with white cat heads printed on the sides, the blowhards. They numbered around 50. There had been perhaps 10 back when we'd been committing crimes here, and never all here at once. I met their leader and extracted a short history of their work in the zone. The cats were being paid lavishly by the government to do whatever the Institute of Extraterrestrial Cultures needed them for. This came with the interesting perk that they could legitimately leave and spend that money, a damn sight better than the prospects of most rich stalkers. In the new age of the zone, things were changing. The Institute was in trouble in the outside world, probably due to the uptick in the deadlier, more world-breaking artifacts of the Central Zone starting to really flow on out. Their mandate was slashed, along with their budget, and the sane cats had taken their leave of this nightmare on a big helicopter, with copious extra fuel tanks by the descriptions of it. That left the insane ones to command the reinforcements. This new crew was shipped to Odessa from someplace I'd never heard of, and apparently were serious vets who hated the world just enough to gamble on the zone. Where have I seen that description before? Now they were posing with big guns. H&K G36 variants straight from the factory lines were popular, and speculating loudly on the new world they would create once they reached the plant. Fat chance of me letting them live that long, if that was their real goal. However, such measures could wait for when they were of no use to us. The mission they'd hired us for was our dream job, to go to Chernobyl. The new leader was named Tyrant, and he had tried and failed with smaller teams already. He said there had been issues with entrenched enemy combatants, and it sounded like Rho and I were going to be of no use whatsoever in solving this. Still, someone somewhere was getting paid on account of their mistaken valuation of us, and we were getting an invitation to walk right at ET with 2 platoons of armoured idiots taking the brunt of the pushback. One of the parties was kidding themselves here, and I was excited to find out which one it was. Apparently they owned us anyway, and charming Tyrant was quick to read us both a long set of rules about conduct within the cats. Yes, they could kill us if we disobeyed their orders. We've lived through that before. I had the nerve to ask what they had arranged with duty. Tyrant gave me one of those smiles that indicated we were going to be killed at the earliest convenient point. Perhaps that was how they'd get their money back from Petrenko.
The zone will kill them first, don't you reckon?
Rho speculated casually. I, less casually, agreed. We spent half an hour eating and gearing up. I was lent a helmet with metal plates and integrated gas filter. No need to say what happened to the previous owner. I scrounged up ammo and food from the Institute's lackeys. They all owed me big time, or at least the AN-94's business end seemed to think so. Around 10 we were ready to die warriors' deaths. We tagged on to the gang as they walked up the muddy, stinking hillside to the metalworks. The stink was from all the corpses sewn into the wet filth. Rho described the aroma to me so that I wouldn't miss out behind my gas mask. Rho was not a fan of the masks, or much of the military chic that dominated the zone's fashion scene. The olfactory plot thickened inside the metalworks. There, the corpses of the zombies I'd killed were still lying in their pools of gore, already remarkable if you know a thing or two about zombies. The smell, though, was absent. They weren't decaying or being eaten by the blind zone dogs our vanguard was scattering with quick bursts. The corpses lay as mementos of a grand day out I'd once had, or we'd once had, as Rho remembers it. By the way, the building hiding the X-16 entrance was gone. Where it had stood was a suite of the scientists' stuff, echo detectors, aerial drop crates still tangled up in their rigging, and a row of 4 black boots, all rights, full of cement. White sticks pointed up and out of them, like bones.
They wanted to know if they could summon back the phantoms of the workers who died when the building was taken up,
Rho explained. I asked my tour guide how they knew this.
Because it worked,
was the answer. I think this might have been a joke in retrospect.
It's not your fault, by the way,
Rho added a minute later. That actually gave me a chuckle. Rho had taken to saying this of a lot of things during our long naps in the duty cell. I don't think I had any faults left to be expunged. Thankfully, there's always time to make a few more. We clattered out of Yantar's rear gate. The flat road raced off through a green countryside. The fields beside the road were lively with flowers and swaying grass. The ground was littered with fallen trees, still full in their leafage. Small birds jumped between them silently, which was an incredibly rare sight. Natural selection was unkind to animals who dared enter the zone, except for Rho. It was the most peaceful and normal scene the zone had offered, and we were excited about what else the so-called new zone had in store. No anomalies in sight. Bristling with life was one way of putting it, which begets the similarly bristling Omega, whatever that meant. Rho. It would have been nice to stop and take it in, although the two guys dressed like robots right behind us disagreed. They had full-face helmets, powered exoskeletons that buzzed with each step, and had long-barrel rifles rising behind their heads. Their hands were content with .45 pistols, better for executing prisoners with, I suppose. The guy on the right had a souped-up Dragunov, and the guy on the left had something far juicier, a Mosin Nagant. I couldn't tell any more about it yet, and the second time I asked to see it, he shouted something unintelligible. He wasn't Russian, thickening the Mosin plot further. Most of the talk we heard was in English. Their various accents practically sounded like different languages. This new crew was much less American than the old one. Guys with less to go back to, I suppose. I think they were talking about a video game. We were alone amongst them until one suddenly trailed back and said to me, "Hey, what are you going to do?" He was Russian. "Dunno, you hired us, right?" I said. "It's not a secret, is it? Tell me," the guy demanded. "We're here to reach the power plant. Where are you going?" Rho politely asked. "You'll go where we go. This is war," the guy insisted. Something broke in a far-off corner. War. Asking for clarification finally got us some details on what was going on, so I'll summarize what we missed. The Carbon Cats had tried to make this same expedition 2 weeks prior and had been beaten back by the guys who got in first. Zoners. The loners who were here for good, I suppose. That was what they called themselves, and they were increasingly organized. Or organized enough that the Cats shit themselves and left their money on the table last time. The Zoners had it bad too, being stuck between the duty hunting lines and the lands of the zone's real natives, the Monolith civilization. The Merc asked me what I knew about those guys, and I had nothing the average stalker by a fire couldn't make up. There was the Brain Scorcher too, as always, which effectively did what duty were dreaming of, killing everyone, despite no one really being certain what, where, or if it was. Those zoners needed to work out how Monolith had tamed it. Rho already knew this, of course, according to the same. "They say a lot came from the cities that were evacuated," the Merc said. "What cities?" I cut in. My stomach rolled around at the tale of the zone's current size. It was twice as large as when we'd entered, claiming new hinterlands faster than ever before. Towns and cities had been cleared out, and yes indeed, there were a lot more stalkers around the Blin than before at the very least. The promise of the new zone was louder than the government loudspeakers. We would still escape somehow, Rho reminded me, and I had to remind them in turn that I was by no means doubting that. One did wonder though, whether the zone would ever stop and let the real world be. Duty didn't think so. It would be a shame if they were right all along, as we weren't going to be listening to them anytime soon. With fresh, radiation-free blood, the Cats were having a more serious go at claiming some alien land for themselves, with the promised return on investment being somewhere between a government contract with the Institute and unlimited wealth and power, and/or the supreme insight of the alien gods. They wanted to find a treasure vault with a Rho-shaped keyhole. Gotta hand it to them, they were probably looking in the right place. After a while, the guy wanted to know the same thing I did, what Rho's deal was. "I heard you were a kid or a ghost or something. Seem real to me," the guy said. "I'm real enough," Rho shrugged. "It's impolite to assume the person you're talking to isn't real." "Yeah? You into manners?" What kind of question was that? Not that we should expect intelligent chat from mercs. "Not especially, but I know what they are. You could tell us your name, for example," Rho mocked. "Oh, it's..." He paused for too long. "Defunct," he concluded. A terrible name for all the build-up. "Pleased to meet you, Defunct. I am Rho, the Chosen One," Rho said. I told them to can it, which was like throwing a pail of hot water into the sea. "Are you an alien?" Defunct asked, straight and true. "No," Rho replied. I was a little surprised. "You're an anomaly, then? Whatever they're calling those things?" "No, those are aliens, most of the time. Or parts of them." "Whatever you say. You did something to make this whole place appear, huh?" "Yes, it was very hard work." "What was it?" "I had to fight the entire universe." "What? Don't expect it to make sense, I warned.
It's very important though, Rho claimed. If you went here without me, the zone would look at you and see nothing. With me here, they won't sweep you away by accident.
The aliens? Defunct asked.
The zone. It's different. That's what all the scientists say, and I'm happy to believe it, since it feels like that. When the aliens left, the zone became something separate to them, and ordinarily that would be fine. However, the zone has been altered and emptied of truth. They say it was because of my powers, and I do wonder sometimes. It wasn't like I was trying to cause trouble. ET has to retrace their steps and work out why the humans are a stumbling block, or why I am a stumbling block.
If you hadn't noticed, Rho had let their rumoured importance go straight to their head, where it grew fat and boisterous. Defunct didn't know what to make of this preaching. He mumbled misgivings and gripped his L85A1, hand painted with desert camo apart from the slider, probably a replaced part given the weapon's hunger for dirt. The desert wouldn't have been kind. So, what's with the name? I eventually said. Fuck off. They called me the Lord in Africa. I meant carbon cats, actually. That's just what we are.
9 lives. Is that the joke?
Rho prodded. If you think it's a joke, start laughing, asshole. That was probably a threat that made more sense in a foreign language. Fortunately, Defunct was pulled back to the front. Then the march was halted. Poliska was close. The city had been attached to military bases in the region, and hence was surrounded entirely by tall fences and checkpoints. They were still intact. The miniature city beyond stood tall. Binocular views gave confusing images of buildings in differing states of collapse when the focus was altered. Apartment blocks burned when standing and pulsed with green smoke when ripped open. The mercs were licking their lips over the fines that must await in such places. They'd probably heard the basics on artifact hunting, although perhaps not the part where you die no matter how many desert village massacres you have under your belt. Our road led to the checkpoint on the south edge of town. There was nothing in the way of outskirts, simply open fields, the fence, then the sudden cliffs of apartment blocks and grey civic halls. We had to pass through a passage of fence to enter, with a convenient bus parked across the road at the end to take shelter behind. The mercs were chatting sharply and pointing at the windows. There were clearly people looking down at us from an apartment block on one side of the road and a high school on the other. The street led down to a grand square with a statue of Lenin overseeing business. Behind him was a glass-fronted monster, a multi-story superstore that probably bit off more than supply lines could chew. More people were shifting about in the windows there, and cloaked heads bobbed along the roof. Essentially, the whole town was only about 5 blocks across, packed buildings and streets designed to be the hub of a metropolis. Rho blamed the statue of Lenin.
The bigger it is, the more bad luck you get,
they philosophized, right on time for the first slow rattles from the windows. AKs without a doubt. The mercenaries got to work fast, under Tyrant's cool-headed direction. The plan seemed to be to enter the buildings as soon as possible, running right into the gunfire on the way. He was either a moron or a genius. Had he clocked those burst patterns and spread, completely amateur. He certainly didn't seem worried about getting shot while he stood there, pointing at this and that through the bus windows. He was a bloody marvel. He eventually threw a smoke bomb, counted 5 seconds using his watch, then swiped his hand. The mercs came alive. A jolt shook my legs. I remained still, the buoyancy of a daydream looming with the presence of a live grenade. This is hard to explain. It was bad. I caught it and looked to Rho, who saw that something was wrong. They pressed their hands on my shoulders and directed my breathing, which refocused me. I felt that I had leapt from a boat in the ocean, only to realize I had no hope of swimming for the shore. A feeling I hadn't felt in a long time, hitting me out of the blue. I was complacent. The action became sharper as the rest of the world shuffled behind the curtain. Most of the cats went right, towards that high school. It would be easy to outflank, and a row of concrete bus shelters provided cover halfway there. The left side was worse. The apartment blocks, with their countless windows, towered over an unbuilt children's park that was crawling with green slime. It reminded me of the fairies we'd seen in that hidden jungle, It was probably another one. When a strip of cats peeled off the side of the bus and ran that way, Rho screamed at them to stop and come back. In this moment of truth, they obeyed. "We don't have to keep them alive, you know," I noted, angrier than I thought. "I want them to win," Rho said. They sounded disappointed, and I immediately regretted my malice. Not that I was necessarily wrong. Tyrant hadn't considered listening to our advice, and stared us down. Then he ordered the 2 guards to stay with us, and flashed off toward the school with another overarm hurl of a smoke bomb into the street. I felt like I hadn't eaten in a long time, but the feeling was curling up gently. The robotic guy with the Dragunov smashed a window in the bus, then used the frame to climb to the roof. The guy with the Mosin Nagant took cover next to us, the weapon in both hands. It had a modern PSO scope almost welded to a strip of metal sticking out of the barrel in front of the action, way too close to the back. Very dumb. If you pulled the bolt while looking down it, a bullet casing would hit you in the chin. The scope had no lens in it anyway. He seemed to be considering firing it towards the buildings, as if he had any chance of hitting something without even the iron sights in usable condition. Better to save the bullets in case he needed to shoot us, he surely concluded. Wise, but I could take him in an instant with my bare hands. I had better options, other options. I knew what I needed, and I was correct to think that it wasn't to sit there reading the time-worn title of Poliska Autobus Soviet. Rho later told me that they were trying to dissuade me from thinking such things. However, the air was shaking with constant gunfire, and even the bus clanked with nerve-binding impacts. The Dragunov guy snapped away so loudly that my ears rang despite the helmet's ear pads. It was impossible to think straight, and so I thought of killing. That was it. Not so much a snap, but the damage was done, the damning undone. I couldn't remember Rho, and left them there as I stood and ran for the school. The Mosin Nagant guy cursed at my back as they followed. That's where my memory really begins to fade. I have fragments of feeling, the rough concrete of those bus stops against my hand, the echo of a mournful sob that gave away the guy creeping through the hedges aside the road, the straight look of a man in a balaclava with 3 eye holes. It's strange to think how quickly it all happened. I was myself, and then I wasn't, and while Rho claims otherwise, I don't remember there being any interim where I could interfere with the transition from one to the other. I know when I woke up, it was when Rho found me. They walked in and saw me sitting against the wall of a living room on the 6th floor of the modern block by the town square. They stepped carefully over all the broken furniture. There were single shots echoing outside now and again. "Are you okay?" Rho asked. I decided to check. Hand on the chest, still wriggling. "Thanks." Annie was in my lap, with no magazine loaded. I had an empty beside me and was missing the rest. The Browning's holster was fastened closed. I was sitting in blood. The whole floor was covered in it. The eye didn't think it was mine. Some was audibly trickling from a body in a torn-up tracksuit on the table beside me. "I'm okay," I finally reported. "That was scary," Rho said, sitting beside me without concern for the mess. "Yeah, sorry. That really happened, didn't it? I'm glad you got this far, though. That must have taken a lot of strength. I really thought it couldn't happen. It's been so long. Back then, I had to look so hard to find you. That means you know what happened, really, and you stayed close, didn't you?" "I don't know." "You did. That is your power, not the pain and the fight. Remember?" "Okay, I did." "Good. Neither of us expected it to be like this. We weren't prepared." He did say that it was war. "No, nothing like this. This is the zone. We're stalkers. This is their world and we have ours. It's their fault. Zoners. What does that even mean? We killed them? They wanted to kill us? Why? This place is here because of us. It's for us, and it's been spoiled. Wait. We have to go, don't we? We have to be... It's about freedom. It's about seeing this, the war, for what it really is, isn't it? You know that when you want it, that illusion, that's because you suffered from it. The suffering ends with me, again. Got it?" I got it. Again. I swayed up to my feet, organized myself, and went to the window. I could hear Defunct was shouting my name in the street, and had been for a while. I waved down and got summoned to the superstore. I said I'd be there. "This might get us closer to the end," I said to the room. Rho nodded. They picked up the wet Mosin Nagant. We went to attend to our orders, pretending things were okay, like every other time. There was always a good reason for someone to suddenly be dead in the zone. In Clear Sky, I'd sat and listened to a man named Pill explaining how a poltergeist had thrown a chunky book at his partner and hit him right where one of his spinal discs had been dislocated in his youth. Thus, it was no surprise the partner died, with Pill as the only witness, over in the train tunnel that led back to its own entrance on the edge of the swamp. And no surprise was it that Pill had an incredibly rare burnt moss artifact hidden in his jacket forevermore after that. He floated by me on the marsh one day, and I fished it out. I sold the artifact to Spore for 5,000 rubles, and the jacket to a journeyman for 7,000 rubles before it was even dry. The artifact was worth a heck of a lot more, especially to an arsonist who wanted to work from home. In Poliska, death had struck again. I didn't know the names of those men I'd woke up next to, and I couldn't tell Tyrant and company how they died precisely. Only that they were dead. I wasn't, and now the zone carries on all the same. I was made to relinquish the Mosin by a guy named Bones, who went off to find its former owner. This was inside that glass-fronted, multi-story superstore. The place was in like-new condition, if you ignored all of the shelves of rotten concrete mix and bundled bricks. Might have been like that in operation too, based on what you hear about these places. The refrigerators on the ground floor made good spots to wash clothing, and mercs were already bringing bed frames and hammocks from the apartments. Hardly any orders were being given, yet a sturdy base was growing before our eyes. Good lot, these mercs. Tyrant took Rho and I upstairs to the clothing section. A few soldiers were rigging up windbreaks along the huge windows. Tactical privacy is the only privacy in the army, after all. I expected some harsh words after Tyrant had stood silently through my featureless report. Instead, he offered Rho and I a place to camp in the corner, and asked after my wounds. Rho insisted we would manage because of their powers. Rho's ego encompassed even the artifacts now, it seemed. We settled in and rested, a leisure no one else was indulging in. All the activity finally spurred me back onto my feet. I wanted to take a walk around the town. Tyrant made Defunct go with me. The guy had involuntarily become my minder. This wasn't so bad, as they were friendly enough now. In fact, everyone in the superstore was gracious, offering greetings and refraining from checking their weapons when they saw me. I think I knew why in principle. Whatever I'd done, the mercenaries respected it. It might have tempted them to take Rho seriously too, which was always a dangerous path to tread. It was a sunny afternoon outside, and warm amid the grid of concrete. A merc was pushing a bicycle across the central square, leaning down to the handlebars to speak into a radio, then rapidly pressing his ear to it. In the street outside the superstore, a guy had stripped down to give himself a bath in some sort of cauldron, leaning out to turn sausages on a gas stove balanced atop a pile of packaging from a dehumidifier. Past him, 1 block out, the road was on fire, engulfing an out-of-place wooden dacha. Aside from that, the anomalous aspects of the town were pretty tame. The green fairies buzzed between roofs like sparrows, and some areas didn't experience time. Good peace and quiet inside. We took a painless stroll around this empty city with our guard lowered almost enough to enjoy it all. Defunct thanked me for helping him out during the fighting. Rho gave me a nod, and I said it was nothing, in the most genuine possible sense. Defunct talked about their time in Afghanistan, and I forced myself not to listen. I wanted to hear just about anything else, and asked what he knew about Rho. "A guide through the zone. Something like that?" he said. "That's exactly right," Rho beamed. "And there are so many places to go." "For artifacts, is that it?" No. Well, yes, if you don't mind dying. I mean changing the world." "Isn't the problem here the world being changed?" "A problem elsewhere, a power here," Rho quipped. "You know about the Wish Granter?" I asked, hoping to cut the torturous drama short. Defunct shook his head and asked about it.
A place with no regrets and nothing to stand in your way, Rho said. We'll take you all the way there, if you like. Sure, I'm interested. With the cats, you mean? He said. No, not with them. In fact, you can't come. You see, once we get there, we have to make sure we get our wish. We might have to kill you for that, you know. And I don't want that, Rho explained. You have to kill to get a wish? Defunct asked. Get out of your line of work if you don't like it, I said, not especially to Defunct. Right. Sounds interesting. Spend a night with a proper stalker and you'll hear all about it. Certainties and contradictions dusk until dawn, Rho said. Does that mean you're not proper stalkers? I don't see the difference. We're not even human these days, Rho said. Rho spoke only for themselves, and fortunately it sounded like a joke. Although I fully believed Rho was human, I should note, and no one else knew them like I did, even if you include Rho themselves in the running. Pompous of me, I know, but there is no way past the truth. After walkies, we were placed back in our corner to await the morning. Tyrant briefed us on the plan. Keep going. A team had been sent back to Yantar to fetch government pay packets, and another would go north in the morning to secure the other of the two new zone settlements, Lemansk. On maps it was a couple of miles out, however it clearly wasn't. From the roof of the store we could see the whole thing. It was perhaps 10 blocks from Poliska, and much larger than on the map. Poliska, conversely, was smaller. The roads appeared to be wet, shimmering in the evening sun despite the clear weather. A shrug was the best explanation for such trivialities. The buildings had a darker mystery. They were all burned to the ground, debris scattered around, could even have been corpses. There were long struts of metal that could have been rotor blades. The remains looked like sandstone, old-fashioned stuff from before the SSR. This wasn't necessarily bad, as sites of death and destruction amused aliens with loose pocketfuls of artifacts. There was more to it though, yet to be seen. Outside the town, the greenery of the new zone met the dead ground of the old. The north end was overlooked by a grid of metal that looked like an old radar scaffold perched on a hill. The building beside it was undamaged, with a clean design. I thought it was a private hospital. It was skeletal and unfinished though. When I looked at it, my mind's eye lit up with a keen sense of direction. Northeast. I could see the power plant in clear relief, and see inside it, see pinions circling within gear wheels on a machine, see the belching gusts of ET dashing towards me, slowing, then withdrawing towards the yellow core of the plant, rooted in the earth, and rooted too in the universe above. I felt utterly safe, and the feeling persisted after Rho dragged the binoculars away. That's not our wish granter. If anything, it's the opposite. Rho scolded me, as if I was supposed to know what that meant. Without the binoculars, I saw nothing much out there, other than the red-topped trees of the polluted forests. There was a helicopter flying on the horizon, a little dot, or something else shaped like a little dot. Dots in the sky aren't machines. That was one of the first stalkerisms I'd picked up. Someone must have ventured far to get trapped in the sky over there, though. It was too close to be in the Belarusian zone. If one stopped to ponder everything, they'd never get to sleep, so we quit the roof for a quiet night behind guarded walls. I had a rough start due to bursts of gunfire at around 5. It took a few minutes for Rho to center me and get everything under control. Zoners were skulking about the city in the miserly light of dawn, discovering that the carbon cats planned to stay here and stay merciless. Amid the skirmishing, the expeditionary team assembled downstairs. The party was 12 mercs, including Defunct. Then Rho and I following behind in a less prisoner-like capacity than before, notably with no guards. We marched down the road out of town. A few tracers shot overhead, and I kept my breathing steady. The darkness receded around us. Reaching Lemansk was easier than it should have been, and understanding what we saw when we got there was much harder. To begin with, my description of it from the roof of the superstore was invalidated. Nothing burned, no corpses, and altogether a very intact, anomaly-free, old-fashioned town of yellow plaster and red tiles. There were engravings, classical statues, and carefully paved avenues leading from clean roads. Even the road markings had an air of nobility, being in an unusual font. Rare to find a place so nice in this part of the world.
In looking to explain this obvious difference with old reality, we checked back towards Poliska. The road was gone, buried in mud, silt and ash. After some heated speculation on who was to blame, several mercs broke into a tall house to use its rooftop balcony. Rho and I, apparently forgotten despite our hired purpose, followed. Defunct was waving us in through the green oak door. "We're still alive, aren't we?" he asked.
"I am,"
Rho noted. What more could one wish to know? We zigzagged up wooden stairs that left little room for bulletproof armor, and arrived to find mercs scrambling up the roof tiles from the balcony to reach the very summit. Poliska remained mostly invisible through the treetops. The tall apartment blocks were cloudy, is probably the best way to describe it. A smoke coming from nothing in particular decorated them. As for the superstore, it was cut in half by a crashed plane. There was a colossal bowl lodged into the eviscerated concrete, part of a radar bulb from an AWACS aircraft. Through the binoculars it was clearly quivering with ET activity. Most details were hidden by a combination of smoke and the poor lighting. Despite the decent weather, Poliska's features appeared dark and too orange. Needless to say, the mercs who were new to the business were none too happy with this. A few went back with the group leader to check on the superstore. The rest were left to guard the house, which turned rapidly into browsing its untouched shelves for anything valuable. Plenty of gold and the like to be had in the right drawers. Defunct stayed with us on the balcony.
"You won't get out to spend it, or sell it, so don't waste energy carrying valuables," Rho advised.
"Then why do stalkers exist?" Defunct returned.
"When everything fails you, you need somewhere to go. Most never leave. Did you know that?"
"They leave all the time, it's in the news. Smuggling, crime, all that."
"How many people is that? There aren't many smugglers at the border, apart from the army. Stalkers go from the alien treasuries to the salesmen. Too far in either direction, and they die. You're a stalker now, or you'd better hope that you are, since people who aren't stalkers aren't worth much to anyone."
I don't know what brought this lecture on, and Defunct didn't seem to enjoy it. "If you know what to do here, say it, okay? We're getting paid to run security for your precious stalkers right now, including you," he said.
"You're doing an awful job,"
was Rho's unsweetened comeback.
"You've brought us to a town that doesn't exist, and ET's looking right at us."
Rho pointed at Poliska. I suppose they saw what Defunct and I didn't in those smoky clouds.
"We all make mistakes,"
Rho shouted through their hands at the sky.
"Can you talk to the aliens?" Defunct asked straight. "No one can. I don't want to explain it,"
Rho said. True to their word, that was the end of that. We went back to the street to meet with the returning team members. Good news. Going back to town revealed it was all still as we left it. There was a pessimistic illusion that went both ways. Everyone went back to find the point at which the images were switched. It was an otherwise unremarkable point about a quarter of the way to the checkpoint fence. It was hard to see it happen precisely thanks to the lush coverage of trees, and I would describe what I could see as a polarity change, like the fading of light allowing one to suddenly see through a window. Which one was real? That depended on which one you were in, of course. Since we had the ability to leave, it was less dangerous than most anomalies, even if it was rather grand in scope. With this discovered and digested, it was back to work. Lemansk didn't look like it would be a ripe field for artifacts, as there was nothing out of the ordinary about it. No sign of ET at all. A dead town, one abandoned recently enough for unspoiled food to be left in kitchen cupboards. We were looking at the place as it was when the power plant had first broken open. That day was usually called the beginning of the visitation, although it became easy for all kinds of other supposed supernatural events that happened prior to be tied into the aliens' mysterious plan. Essentially, we had another pleasant stroll, although at the time it was tense and dreary. No one knew what to expect, and the mercs were obsessed with advancing according to military procedures when they weren't rooting through houses. Rho and I trailed behind.
"You know, if we tried to leave, to go back to the real world, we could never make it from here," Rho claimed.
"I remember the route, all the way back to Clear Sky, then to the Cordon," I said. "We have artifacts, we can bribe our way out like Zedric."
"No,"
Rho shook their head.
"It's too far now. You don't know how deep we are. Getting deeper no matter where we go. It's this anomaly, the whole town, We've gone further than we thought.
Yeah? Well, the destination's still ahead.
You're absolutely right.
Rho beamed.
Do you think these guys probably won't notice if we look for it?
I said, with a bolt of nerves. The town was cramped and confusing, excellent for making our escape. Only we needed somewhere to escape to. Alas, the mere thought of treachery brought watchful defunct running up to us.
There's trouble. Hide and be quiet, he said.
What trouble? I asked.
We're not alone. Possible hostiles.
Who? Zoners?
Don't know. Hide as close as you can to hear us.
Fuck. Give us a radio.
Sorry. Come on.
If it wasn't the zoners, there was only one other possibility this deep in the zone. It was time to see something I'd been hearing about since the very beginning. We followed Defunct through the streets to the edge of the river. There was a park here, with paths of white stone leading down to a quaint bridge, then up to a bandstand. Blood dripped down the wooden stairs. Gunfire came from a yellow house at the park's boundary, and armoured troops moved on the road reaching to both sides. There was plenty of noise, I think, but Rho helped me ignore it. Defunct pushed us into a cafe and hid briefly with us behind the counter.
I've got to help them,
he eventually said, and pointed at us as he shuffled out like we were dogs. The moment he was out the door, I pushed off for the stairs at the back. I could hear a helicopter engine nearby. Rho followed me slowly, looking at the pictures on the walls.
The aliens must have taken them too, like the people in Pripyat, they mused. I wish we could talk to them.
Stay and talk to me, I commanded. Rho got serious and caught up with me on the third floor. From a bedroom window I could see the fighting around the river. The mercs were stuck using trees for cover against the concealed men shooting from afar. The shooting was at its apex.
Look at this,
Rho shouted. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I searched the floor and found what I was looking for. The bathroom window looked through a gap in the buildings towards the power plant. Only a sliver of it was visible, but it should have been completely obscured by the town and forest. It was visible because it was huge. I would estimate 5 times the real size. This, though, was nothing compared to what was beside it. It was a cenotaph, although I didn't call it that at the time. All knowledge of the fighting on the other side of the aged bricks was lost.
The glass reveals it, like Krieger showed us,
Rho said. What is it? I decided to ask.
It's what the aliens thought we would want. It's not real, only an image.
You're sure?
I think they warned me about this. It's fine. It will be normal once we leave. We saw that earlier, didn't we?
Yes, I suppose we did.
You like looking at it, don't you?
That a problem?
How does it make you feel?
After taking stock, I said, I feel there's some purpose to all this.
To humanity and the zone,
Rho added. Yeah. Can we get a better look somewhere?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, come on, how do you know that?
Because we're needed outside.
They told us to stay in here.
Do you even know how long you've been standing there?
Not this again.
Look at your watch, bro, and decide which way this is going to go. I won't hold you back, I promise. We need you again.
It didn't sound like Rho was even talking to me, and I quickly deduced why. Engines rumbled outside, and the air pulsed below the blades of a short-nosed mill gunship, probably an Mi-35. A truck was parked on the other side of the river, and men in white and green camo, absurdly clean, were dragging the limp carbon cats into the back. In the river, a merc was firing an L-85A1 at the chopper. It was defunct.
We could probably escape,
Rho noted. Wrong direction, I growled.
Then we'll wait.
We'll wait. We crept back down to the cafe and peeked through the door. The collection operation carried on outside the big window. There was no more shooting, but after a while a rocket from the chopper went down and kicked up a splash by the river. After that, the chopping receded. We watched the white uniformed men finish loading their truck, then very slowly crawl away behind the wall of 50s apartment blocks beyond the road. It's them, isn't it? I asked Rho. Rho nodded.
They will know the way to the power plant, they said.
It was a very good point.
Are they taking the catch there? Or to their homes?
What for?
Want to ask them?
Yeah, I do. Soon there was no movement to see. We went up to the cafe window and saw nothing else. A ghost town once again. Rho made sure I didn't think much about what had just happened. Monolith. They looked human, didn't they? I said.
That's what they said about me,
Rho replied. So I'm right. Maybe we can talk to them.
We've lost our guards, though. We'll have to be careful to get much further.
Sure. We could be about to make a breakthrough, actually. We've got two options the way I see it. We head out into the country and try to walk to the plant, or we follow Monolith and look for their routes.
The brain scorcher might get us if we go in the open,
Rho reasoned. Yep.
And the Monolith routes could still be deadly to us.
Yep.
A sane person would go back.
Yep, they did already. Where's that leave us?
We don't know. We'll have to ask Monolith. You don't have enough bullets to do anything else, so it's quite safe.
With the knots of Rho's rights and wrongs guiding us into uncertainty, I opened the door, checked for movement one last time, then made for the bloody river. Had the wind been a fraction different, I wouldn't have clocked Defunct's moan. He was half submerged in the water. Rho helped me down to check on him. He didn't recognize me or even know I was there. I slowly pulled him from the river and lay him down on the mowed grass. Exhausted by the weight of his armor, I lay down too. Rho told me he was bleeding in various places and went for the bag, but I wanted to wait a moment. I removed my helmet to breathe the pure air and listen to the running water. The distant sky promised a better place. The cenotaph, looming invisibly over us, was silent. The idea the enemy were close by was ludicrous to consider, and yet...
We're not alone. Something is moving,
Rho warned. I grabbed Annie and looked around, but Rho clarified.
In the alien world, I mean, the stillness was broken. It's gone now.
We're safe? I asked.
It's still close. What is it?
Rho asked their imaginary ET allies. The answer came thick and fast. We were cast into the shadow of something unseeable, then lit up again by falling whips of blue plasma, like lightning caught in time. Grumpily, I arose.
The house,
Rho said, pointing to that yellow house on the park's edge. I turned to run, then made it a full 360 and stooped to hook under Defunct's shoulders. Rho was very happy, but was not willing to help pull. I put my bag on the ground to shed weight, then ploughed us over to the house. More lightning whips were falling from the sky and bending over roofs, around corners. It was Zeus. Now the whips appeared white rather than blue, and the yellow house was grey. I got lighter and lighter and sped up. The magic let me head up the steps to the door as if I was carrying a bag of party snacks. The air around me was being pushed away in all directions, like the sky was a bellows being emptied. I got through the door. The walls revealed their cream plaster, and the trail we'd left over the threshold its dull red. The whipping of energy had a violent sound to it all of a sudden, and shook the ground. I dragged Defunct to the middle of an empty hallway and lay him on the overtreated wooden boards.
It doesn't know. They've never seen in here, so they don't know anything about it,
Rho mumbled to themselves. Despite the risk of being mysteriously killed at any instant, I focused on bandaging Defunct. The eye was eager to get involved. I took his helmet off and wiped his face with his own wet socks, the cleanest thing to hand that I wasn't saving for my own deathbed moments. The storm moved on, then returned, then moved on for good. By then, Defunct was a little less defunct.
We won?
He asked me. I shook my head. I would have explained what happened, but what did I even know? To take an optimistic angle, I said that the rest of his team had been captured and driven away. I had to say most of it more than once. Defunct could barely hear me, even right in front of him. Once I finally got my lies across, Defunct sat up. As he did, I reached over and pulled the eye back out of his burnt vest. Didn't want it getting ideas about who the real provider was around here. I didn't bother explaining the brief sortie from Zeus, and Defunct didn't ask. A good man. So good that he only had one goal behind his shallow sockets: to rescue his comrades. After confirming he didn't want to go back, I pulled him to his feet. I told him his ears were damaged, and he swore at me louder than he could have known. I only wanted to make sure he noticed. We went back out to retrieve our things. An ammo count gave Defunct the advantage at 3 magazines to my 2. I had only what I'd collected from the zoners in Poliska, having expended what duty and the IEC had bequeathed me. That said, as Rho and I had agreed, we were only planning to negotiate. Shame we didn't stop that passing god and try it on them too. We didn't have much of a plan other than to round the corner I'd seen the truck take and search from there. Doing so brought us to a street of small apartment buildings, then to a crossroads. The river reappears to our left, with the bridge leading over it. A depressing tunnel of grey-black shops with no signs stretched out to the right. In front was a curving residential street, with more yellow, old-fashioned houses and a few parked cars. That was the way. Why? Because behind the houses we could see the top of the unfinished building and the radar array that I'd noticed from a distance. The unmistakable silhouette of a mill gunship broke the roofline, landed. Pointing this out to Defunct, he vowed revenge. The place was a few blocks away and up a hill, so we took some shortcuts in between the townhouse alleys and gardens. I stopped us at the last corner to peer at the hill. There was a zigzagging driveway to reach the construction site, and a thick, merciless set of stairs. There were prefab concrete walls around the top. The radar array to the right looked poorly joined, with some welds being replaced with rope ties. It was active. When the wind was still, a hum was audible, probably from transformers at the base. More interesting was a Monolith soldier standing alone in the road. I took aim. He looked at me, yet he was unarmed. I thought he was keeping watch in a very sloppy kind of way. Then I noticed the green fairies perched among the grass embankment behind him. They took flight, and in an instant the soldier disappeared in a sort of lens of light, something akin to the usual alien space-time blurring, yet larger and brief. This act boded poorly for the recovery of Defunct's mates, and for our tell-all interview with the alien's human concubines. Still, in the silence that followed, what else was there to do but carry on? We went up the challenging stairway and reached the gap in the outer wall of the site. It looked like a hospital, as I'd predicted, although the commanding location and missile defense radar suggested it was going to be a Cold War government office. It was very unfinished, missing most features down to the majority of the walls. The stairs were there in the middle, clearly visible from the outside. There was nowhere the truck could have driven from here due to the piles of unused materials blocking all progress around the building, and yet the truck was absent. As we'd made the effort, Defunct let us know he planned to go check the helicopter on the roof. I kept Annie close and followed. Rho stuck to me carefully. I feared action with the soldiers, but all was quiet. We crept around amid the hum of the radar and took in views of the town. We could see ruined Poliska clearly from up here, with that AWACS lodged in the superstore at a creative angle. It was a fantastic scene, although the confused lighting made it a pain to really observe. Among the best vistas of the zone it remains, all the same. The roof was the gunship and nothing else. No one else. Defunct drew a knife and went for the fuel tanks. They weren't that weak. I tapped him on the shoulder and showed him how to open the cockpit. He unstrapped a grenade from his belt and grunted happily. We all know the feeling. I went to crouch on the stairs, then Defunct practically tripped over me, speeding down for cover. A shattering pop of disappointing magnitude sounded. Defunct might not have heard it at all. We went back to check the damage, then returned happy. It was like a peaceful game of cards atop a cracked dam, hope undashed and pain uncertain. But where was the pilot? We walked around the roof and looked over the edge for clues. To avoid being overly mystical, I will tell you what we found out later. That the entire Monolith troop was very close by and were watching us the whole time. We didn't see them yet, nor any sign of the truck. As for where we should go, Rho had us locked on target. "The power plant," they said, pointing. It was visible across the red forest, the black chimneys stapling it to the white sky behind, the crouched rows of towers at Pripyat to its west, the lake that ever rained shimmering upwards to its east. There wasn't much between us and it, although we knew that to be a lie already.
"Hey," Rho said.
"What?" I replied.
"I want to go to the power plant."
With that robotic line, the power plant opened like a flower and faulty space-time plumed in a burning jet towards the sky. It was not possible to know what we'd seen right then, let alone write it down in a permanent way. What did make sense was the way the yellow injection into the sky spread and turned pink. The roaring sound of Earth's crust shuddering consumed my shout to defunct.
"It wasn't my fault,"
Rho said to me. I didn't have time for that. There was an ornate square house, a villa really, a short ways down the opposite side of the hill to where we'd climbed. We made a helix on the stairway, then practically ejected ourselves from the construction site. I saw Monolith soldiers scattering into the neighborhood. I stood and raised Annie to fire at them, before Rho pushed me back into a run. Defunct was falling behind. I pointed for the house, presumed he got the message, then dashed ahead. Like many of the old houses in town, the main doors were on the second floor. We'd picked the wrong house, as the stairs to the temptingly open main entrance were covered in that green slime. A trap if ever there was one. And like a fly entering the jaws of a hungry plant, I had no control over my deliberate demise. I simply splashed through the sludge, which produced an effect I would describe as like having bundles of children's sparklers lit against your leg. My clear sky padded trousers were turned into fishnets and rancid smoke. I stumbled and rolled through the door, then scrambled to take off my boots. It felt like they were parasites biting at me, and given the apparent sentience of the green goo snaking all over them, I think that description is closer to the mark than I'd like. I had a little bleeding around the ankles. Perfectly fine, really. Outside, the booming and flashing was cacophonous as ever. I stood and moved close to the door. I didn't see Defunct, nor his corpse. I shouted his name into the rumbling air, then closed the door. It's not like I locked it or anything. It helped quieten things down. Rho finished inspecting the boots, concluding that they were goners. There was hope to find new footwear in this still-furnished house, I thought, although we didn't get far in looking around. We passed from the entrance hallway into a living room that smelled of fresh paint and featured hideous space-age furniture. The centerpiece of the room was even more striking. It was as tall as us, white and green with gold details, holding an LR300 with the magazine speckled with white dots. Annie came to my shoulder beside a sharp breath. "Wait!" Rho shouted. A good idea. I lowered the weapon part way. The Monolith soldier hadn't raised theirs at all, and looked at us calmly through a gas mask clipped to a ribbed rubber hood. It was time to say something, but I was coming up empty. Rho was there to help. "You are Monolith," they said. The soldier nodded and said with a toneless voice, "The danger will pass." It didn't come from the person standing in front of me, and struck me as being the most neutral sound I'd experienced, lacking accent, gender, or any identity. It was the voice of a thought, or at least that's what my brain ended up doing with whatever signal was hitting my ears. It was right up Rho's alley. "You are connected to the aliens. Please, we seek the power plant, a wish. The aliens don't mind granting wishes, do they?" they asked. "You are not ready for your wish," Monolith said. "I am, really," Rho insisted with rare passion. "You can take us to the power plant. That's why we came to find you. We don't want to fight. Even those people who you were killing didn't really want to fight. We all want to explore. But only I need to see the wish granter. Me and my companion here. Call him Zig." I found myself tapping on my collarbone redundantly. "You cannot understand it," Monolith stated. "It hunts. We shall say appendage, a piece that is not established within the holistic body. This appendage selects humans to serve. Wish granting has been halted due to its denigratory consequences on the information space. The appendage wishes to preserve the information space until the holistic body reformulates a true mind." "That's why it was lashing out at us from the sky," Rho said, to me I think. "Is it the brain scorcher?" I asked. I intended it for the soldier, although they likely didn't know what I meant. I presumed the answer was yes. "Unfortunately, we have to get the wish. There isn't anything that overrides that," Rho said slowly, back to that bedside manner. "This means we need to negotiate with the appendage. If you don't want that,
Again, there's no other option for us, so we will use violence. We've already had to kill many people to get here. You won't harm us, will you, for trying to talk?
If you don't want to harm the appendage, we will not harm you. You don't need to harm us either, Monolith said. I felt calm hearing that.
I know the aliens are interested in me. We can make a special deal with them,
Rho offered. It is... Monolith began, before turning to see lumbering defunct come in through the kitchen. He barked and blasted the soldier with a 3-shot burst. They fell to the ground with capitulatory limpness. He seemed shocked and pointed his weapon at us too. Rho was speechless. They were talking, I said. What? Defunct replied. I stepped over the body and practically shouted in his broken ear, That soldier was giving us information, you fucking idiot! Defunct understood the kind of mistake he had made and shriveled down into one of those egg chairs. He mumbled that he hadn't heard anything, sounding more pitiful and useless than I could stomach at that height of danger and disappointment. The flashing and thundering at the windows kept the stress levels at their peak. Rho wanted to inspect the body, of course, so I gave the go-ahead. They turned the body onto its back and took the magazines and tools out of the webbing, neatly arranging them on the furry floor tiles. With the gear out of the way, it was clearly a feminine body underneath. Rho undid the mask clips. A bony, utterly pale face, calmly composed, staring straight ahead with alarming focus. A thought arose. It was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, but that record gets broken every time. It had been standing a long while since coming to the zone. The army probably never let women in no matter the price, if only because that's how such things were handled in the old days. Moreover, I'd wager there was a certain brand of insanity unique to men in this country that brought them to the gates of hell without overthinking the consequences. It was probably the same everywhere, although Rho claims to have heard otherwise. Ultimately, the thing in front of me needed no more attribution than a corpse we created, and it certainly didn't matter what it used to be or was going to be. The ammunition Rho had inventoried, now that's a torch to carry on to the future. To think about it any other way was to ask for further trouble. Defunct told us he'd taken psi blockers, some pills the cats had provided him with on the chopper in, and then had a fun time breaking into the basement downstairs. Hence he was alive, about which I felt much worse now than I had in the minutes prior. I looked around the house for some shoes, and didn't get anything big enough, although overly formal black trousers made for a new base layer on my ragged legs. Defunct came to the rescue again. He had a small pair of flats, practically sandals, stashed in his bag. I traded them for some 5.56 cartridges from Rho's pile. And all the while the zone exploded and stormed, safely beyond the arbitrary threshold of glassless windows. We waited it out in the living room, Defunct clicking the cartridges into a magazine, Rho staring at the corpse, me closing my eyes when I could. Defunct asked to buy some cigarettes off me. I said I would give them for free if I had them. He said I was a good man. Evidently I was better than the men he was used to doing his deadly business with, if they didn't even share cigs. I let Rho know this wasn't the time to press such inquiries, and we got ready to leave. We couldn't expect an all-clear blip to come through on a radio, so we judged the sky by eye. It was usually safe to leave while the pink aura remained, as long as the soundscape was calm. We were on careful lookout for Monolith. They would be emerging too, or so we thought. After sitting in the doorway like cats for a while, seeing nothing of note, we heard the sound of an engine. It was coming from the construction site. Rho and I were pondering heading the other way towards Pripyat, and maybe another diplomatic summit with the natives. Defunct was happy to go on ahead to the site, and I felt we should probably follow to check too. I'm not entirely sure this was the right choice, but the subsequent series of events could have been what kept any chance of us getting our wish alive in retrospect. It began with a congregation all over the eaves and empty window panes. Monolith soldiers stood watch, none showing their face, nor showing alarm at our approach. Defunct shouldered his weapon briefly. There was no use fighting. However, there was use to moving forwards, since the sound of a running engine was growing louder. Close to the top, we could see the truck through the skeleton of the building. Its open flatbed had dark helmets and navy blue shoulders poking over the sides. I got the feeling that it had been there the whole time, but I wasn't going to be too hard on myself, with a council of armed alien mages giving silent invitation to enter their stillborn church. It was about 50-50 that the truck had always been there versus it not actually being there now. We couldn't know what Monolith expected of us. All we knew was that they weren't stopping us. We walked right by them and through the site unchallenged. We approached the truck. No one was in the cab, and the back was full of merc bodies and their gear. Monolith surveilled us like plotting owls. Defunct reported that the team members were dead. He asked aloud where the rest of the team were. No answer. These people were being quite rude, and I wondered if they knew how much more punishment we deserved. Eventually, Rho rescued us from the quiet. "We're going to move these bodies to be with their kin," they said. "Irrelevant," was the unanimous response. This voice of Monolith came from no one in particular, although it wasn't an omnipresent sound like E.T.'s whispers. "You may not understand the importance. It is important from our perspective, or his perspective," Rho explained, pointing to Defunct in the truck. "What do you want? Are we in ceasefire? Negotiate properly!" Defunct shouted angrily. "Be careful," I said to him. He wouldn't have heard it. "You must stay with us," Monolith declared. "Protect the holistic body while time is replotted. Do not serve yourselves. If you do not agree, then drive this vehicle hence." "Fuck off! What the fuck is your deal?" Defunct exploded. I went to the back of the truck and stopped him from storming out. "Hey, you can hear them, can't you?" I said to his ear. "They said we can go. That's all you want right now. Or stay, be their guest." Defunct thought about it for a moment, then told me to get in the back. There were seats for us all in the cab, but I suppose he wanted to be fully in control. So Rho and I clambered to the rearmost part of the flatbed and sat with the corpses. I'm sure the symbolism was not lost on E.T. Monolith gave no reaction to our move. "It might not be so bad," I heard Rho saying. They were a lot more interested in assimilating with the E.T. cult than I. If Defunct hadn't been there, Rho might have insisted on staying. That would certainly have been the wrong choice. For us, anyway. It is hard to speculate on what might have happened if we hadn't let this door close on us, the door we had come far and killed many to open. Becoming a Monolith thing might not have solved our problem, but I bet it would let us forget it. Rho liked the sound of this. I said that I would forget them too. Rho said the aliens would not allow it. Well, we could argue with no information whatsoever all we liked, the bodies around us taking no sides. Defunct got to grips with the controls and rolled us down the zigzagging driveway into the streets. For a few seconds, it seemed like the worst was over. In my last glimpses of the construction site, I noticed the Monolith soldiers had turned away from us and raised a hand. A salute to the power plant, Rho thought, incorrectly. It was a signal. I had Annie at the ready, but there was nothing that needed shooting for once. Instead, the indescribable invisible presence came down from the sky and produced its cyan hairs of hot magic over the road. Defunct screamed, jerked us side to side a little, then seemed to settle on a desperado's gamble, drive through at top speed. "It's the appendage," Rho said. "No shit, don't let your brain get scorched," I growled. I tapped on the window on the back of the cab. No reaction from Defunct. I let him focus on the road. The town was hardly the same one we'd come through earlier. The buildings were more decrepit now, some with blast damage. The streets were littered with debris, both stone and metal. We had to slip past crashed helicopters in absurd quantities. Half an air fleet had come down in the Central Park alone. Not gunships, transports, Mi-8s and the like. Most were UKAF, with some Russian-marked ones too. There were no corpses. The river was dry. The appendage appeared ahead of us with tendrils flying high. They raked down along the road and flashed through our truck and bodies. It felt like waking up from a dream where you'd been flying. All was normal after, and Defunct was still wildly reeling the weak steering around. We'd been reduced to a crawl by the rubble and splashed machines.
"It was painful,"
Rho said. I hadn't felt anything. Are you alright?
"It wanted me out. It wanted me to stop ruining everything,"
they said, descending almost to tears.
"It won't come back. Will it? Tell me it won't come back."
I couldn't feel the scorcher nearby, nor see the electric whips. The sound of running water was too loud to ignore, though. Then there was movement. The mercs weren't all dead. To either side of the flatbed, they slumped forward onto the pile of weapons. I gave them the benefit of a very stupid doubt. The nearest brought a G36 up to my face. I shouted "hey" and grabbed the end of the barrel to push it away. The merc shot through my hand. So be it. Annie was in my lap. I folded back a little and fired with the other hand, the stock against my stomach. All the passengers were turning guns or their hands on me. Defunct stopped the truck, the movement throwing the mass of attackers all over me.
"Shoot them! Shoot them!"
Rho was advising. Good tip. I wrenched the Browning out and wrestled to get it raised. I was covered in equally squirming armor and felt gun barrels scraping across my torso. "Defunct!" I called. He was there somewhere. I started shooting, and a few of the mercs did too. I didn't feel anything. Rho was on the roof of the cab, watching uselessly. The mercs were making noises in their helmets, failed words. Defunct shouted for us to stop. Another good tip. I almost rolled over in my attempts to shoot a spread of shots around me. A shotgun blast took the edge off my helmet. Then the continuous crackling of the L85A1 jostled the whole pile. My mask was slipping around and I couldn't see much, which empowered the swiping of my arms. I made it to daylight and Defunct standing at the cusp of the truck. A couple of mercs were still moving. Without thought, I put the Browning at their necks and fired, switching magazines midway through. By the time I was done, Defunct's hand was centimeters from snatching the pistol away.
"What are you doing?"
he exhorted.
"They became undead,"
Rho calmly replied. "Keep driving," I commanded. Defunct placed his hands on the corpses. "It isn't over," I shouted louder. He definitely heard me. We both looked to the sky as if there was something to see. I think, looking back, that the brain scorcher wasn't there anymore. This made more sense in distant retrospect. For a time we were safe on account of the thing having earthly limitations. A relatable weakness, unfortunately. It was enough to get us driving on again after I agreed with Defunct that we wouldn't throw the bodies out of the truck. He drove more carefully now, and I called through the broken glass to up the pace. Like a child, I spent the few minutes of driving that remained demanding that the journey be over faster. We passed the house we'd ducked into when we first arrived, then left the town. Ahead, the dark and desolate tomb of Poliska flashed back to old glories, gentle and overcast. The switch made the danger seem very far away, despite the short drive. How ready we were to buy into the illusion of safety. The noise echoing from the apartments got our attention, and the mess of action in the sky shattered any hope of reprieve. I put my last half a magazine into Annie and took a deep breath. The area around the superstore had changed. It was surrounded with a redoubt of repurposed concrete panels, and the mess of old sheds that backed onto it had been cleared away. It made a convenient place to park. Most of the bullets coming our way were from the other side of the superstore, with only a few coming all the way out the remains of the rear windows. They were infrequent enough that getting out of the truck wasn't overly risky. We ran for the back of the store and were immediately held at gunpoint by the mercs. They realized their mistake and let us in. Defunct unloaded all he knew. The others asked after Tyrant, which brought them out to inspect the truck. The sound of engines droned overhead, and sometimes heavy rounds of shooting from across the square made everyone shrink. Rho and I weren't paid much attention until the mercs realized we had conveniently survived. We avoided some blame thanks to Defunct, who explained how we saved him and helped get the bodies back. That was worth a lot to the Carbon Cats, for whom turning recovered bodies into diamonds was a long-standing tradition. Although you could say these leftover guys weren't really Carbon Cats anymore, since their leaders weren't going to come pick them up from the middle of this cursed war zone. Yes, another war. Helicopters were coming and going across the sky, some dragging vehicles hung underneath, even a BTR variant in one ambitious case. The weirder thing was the design and markings of the choppers. They weren't UKAF, which matched with what I heard one of the mercs explaining to Defunct. We got the Chinese shooting at us from that roof. Across the square was the apartment building I'd woke up in yesterday. On the roof, Poliska was written with big steel letters painted red. From behind the various struts and flicks of the font, men in urban camouflage peeked and sniped. The superstore's shelves were ceiling high and packed with construction materials, but that still wasn't enough to stop 3 of the 12-man crew inside getting picked off so far. Now there was a stalemate, and the sickening wait for an assault after dark. Exhausted, Rho and I dragged ourselves up the rear stairs to the top floor, a narrow slice designed to hold industrial plant that never arrived. It was a great hideout, and nearby the stairs went up to the roof. Rho and I sat on the uppermost stair and made a crack in the door to see the sky while we ate the shrink-wrapped flapjacks Defunct had requisitioned for us. Helicopters kept flying overhead, generally heading towards the power plant, or back from it, notably less frequently. The zone rumour was that the army had tried to capture the place before, the Ukrainian army, that is. These helicopters were from all over the world. I saw Chinese and American transports side by side. The world at last unites against their common enemy, which apparently included my present company. That the craft were being allowed to fly at all was unusual, given what we'd heard. However, there was reason aplenty from the zone's point of view. It was the same reason Monolith had been shipping the merc corpses away. We'd see the full story here later on. In the meantime, darkness approached. I was called down to back up Defunct's story about Lemansk, or specifically that we could use that route to escape the raiders. Not that it would leave us with other places to go. The zoners. We'll pay them off, one said. I learned that there was a zoner camp in the Red Forest, which a few enterprising stalkers were smuggling food to these days. The mercs had been working with these independent criminals to get artifacts back to Yantar, and in turn had fought off several probing attacks by well-trained zoner parties hoping to claim this business for themselves. A plan was hatched that we would pack everything up as best we could and take the truck that way. With enough material, some form of bribe or supplication, we could land a good place to hide. The question was whether this held any use to Rho and I. To find out, I got some information from a man named Cabbage. He was the one I'd seen bathing in the street, and seemed half a shot of vodka away from repeating the stunt even now. We passed tense hours with a chat that revealed many things. Firstly, we'd been in Lemansk for approximately 5 weeks. Intriguing but no longer surprising, and I had privately assumed worse. The IEC was leaving Yantar, creating a black market rush to get artifacts into the wrong hands. I asked after Sidorovich, whom Cabbage hadn't heard of, an answer in itself. He said that the zoners had women in their camp, then clarified that this was a rumour a stalker had passed to him, then further admitted the stalker had only claimed to have heard the news via a distant megaphone announcement. Sounded true enough then. More important was the news of the current zoner project. They had declared war on the Brain Scorcher. Cabbage didn't know what it was. Did the zoners? It was endearing news, since Rho and I had common cause. So what if our only interaction with these guys so far was getting shot at by them? If we couldn't strike a deal with the Brain Scorcher, our next best hope was to strike a deal with them. Their hopeless deaths might open windows for enterprising stalkers like us, I reasoned, and Rho ultimately agreed. As for the military operation, it was 2 days old and supposedly was related to an international pact to destroy the zone. The rest of the rumours effectively cancelled each other out in their contradictions, leaving only the meagre truth that stalkers were being killed on sight by an increasing concentration of boots on the ground. The wearers of those boots weren't going to fare much better, that was for sure. Night came and carried on quietly. After the first hour of complete darkness, we began to relax. We shuffled around under blackout and saw nothing out of the ordinary in the square. Defunct tapped Rho and I on the shoulder and took us out back to the truck. It was marginally lighter outside. He said we'd been given permission to take our pick of the leftover equipment as a reward for helping him. I already had a payout in mind: a like-new G36 assault rifle with high contrast sight, a .45 caliber USP compact, and best of all, new trousers and boots. I also bagged most of the ammunition the dead had among them. The G36 needed expensive 5.56 cartridges. I crawled back to Defunct to ask if he wanted to cut in and make any claims, which he declined with a sad air of grace. He swapped places with me to rearrange the bodies, making more space to load other materials in the morning. Rho and I kept watch nearby. The helicopters had stopped coming and going, though jet engines still rumbled above the clouds. The leftover sounds of fighting drifted into town now and again, not much more alarmingly than we'd slept through with duty. If the Chinese were planning to storm the superstore, they were doing an excellent job of getting into position quietly. Rho speculated that if we had some of that truth-seeing glass, we'd probably see they weren't even there all along. What about the guys who got killed? I countered. Doesn't have to be real to kill you. Rho instantly jabbed. Touché. Defunct finished up and we all crept back upstairs. He helped me carry my stupid amount of luggage, for which I gave him my Browning as payment. He didn't want or need it, but felt the stories in it when he took hold of the weathered smooth grip, I know it. Similarly, the merc named Bones was still around, so I gave him Annie as a way of apologizing for the incident with his friend. He cried as he took it from me. I left quickly, my load lightened. Everyone napped in shifts. Dawn was the next drawer of the deathly deck, or it should have been. I was woken up by Rho an hour before my allotment ended, with news that we were all going to die. "We've nearly caught up to what we saw," they insisted. I dared to ask for clarification, at which Rho took me to the roof. We went through the rusting door, and Rho pointed at the sky straight away. It was clear and dark. Death, if it could ever be pictured. Actually, it wasn't dark enough. Several flares were falling, far too high to be used for proper night action, and all in a row. They were pyrophoric flares for scrambling heat-seeking ordnance. Then I saw some glints of moonlight flashing on a strange silhouette. The binoculars revealed an AWACS jet steadily drifting at an obscene pitch, engines shuddering on and off the wings. The radar dome was leaving a trail of neon orange light that shimmered and mixed into the dark. "That's the one," Rho said. The realization hit me like a falling plane. I screamed at the watchman to get everyone up and out. While they asked why, my sense of urgency was answer enough. I threw my pack on, then span down the stairs ahead of the rest. Everyone was calling to each other to get outside, no one knowing why yet. Then we heard the stuttering sound of the AWACS's huge engines. I directed everyone who was anywhere close behind me to sprint across the cleared yard and towards the border fence. The slurred engines coughed closer, and the glow of those alien flashes on the dome stretched the superstore's shadow over us. It pulled up close to the ground and washed into the city. It struck the hostile apartment building down and span upwards, then sliced into the front of the superstore. It got most of the way through before the concrete took its grip. Flames exploded from the windows. The shaking of space-time around the dome was tearing the structure apart. I noted I'd never seen this design for an AWACS before. It was too wide and too thin, yet strong enough to be standing upright in the wreckage, with its tail held over the square. The flames obscured any identifying markings. It should also be noted that all the mercs got out alive, thanks to Rho. The falling wreckage had burned the truck and the corpses, but the fallout hadn't got much further. We were all okay in the empty lot, aside from 2 old army bodies side by side. Immediately the mercs wanted to go back inside to rescue gear and the truck. They were, though, clever enough to predict what the collapsing structure and jet fuel blaze was going to say about that. Rho and I smugly sat with all our possessions in a single backpack and no bodies we needed to bury. In fact, we all sat there for a time, with nothing to do, nowhere to go, and a rare spectacle of destruction to communicate to us that our fortunes had run dry. It was a very normal spectacle, given what the zone could do. The refreshing normalcy of the new zone and its traditional approach to disaster. Ultimately, the mercs were going to wait the fires out and recover their valuables as best they could. That was the beginning and end of their grand plans now. A few suggested they find a way out, and the debate brought them over for Rho and I's opinion. Give everything to keep going, or give everything to get out, was my advice, coining the philosophical keystone of the last age of the zone. Scouting parties reported no activity at the apartment block, or anywhere else in town. Battle still plucked away elsewhere. As far as my own advice, I knew which fork Rho and I were going to follow. I rather suddenly bid goodbye to the mercs, wanting to use the remaining darkness to slip into Zona territory unseen. Defunct offered to guard us. Ada, the leader now, said he would show us part way there, since it wasn't obvious. We agreed and departed the rest on good terms. I do wonder if they got their comrades out of the rubble in the end. Not that it would have mattered. Ada took us a few blocks over from the superstore. "You know, we were supposed to kill you once you got us rich," he remarked. "Yeah, I thought so," I nodded casually. A good conversation. We came to a spot where holes had been made to hold foundations for large buildings. One had a pipe sticking out of the mud, big enough to walk through at a stoop. We got the directions from here, and Ada returned to the superstore. Defunct offered to go first, and I took him up on it. The pipe had several snorks living in it, which Defunct dispatched with shooting that echoed deafeningly. Not so bad for him, eh? He gave us a thumbs up that blocked my flashlight for a tense moment. I fist-bumped it away, which made him laugh. Rho was sulking, not enjoying the pipe. Luckily for them, it opened up into an empty reservoir dug into a hillside. It was quiet and muddy. We could see the treetops of the red forest on the other side of a hill for a while, although we had to go down into the privacy of the reservoir first. There was a road tunnel here in which many trucks were parked. About halfway down the tunnel, they transitioned from brand new to completely ruined. The new zone border. Back to the old zone. It was colder, noticeable through all my layers and gear. The concrete was mouldy, and the movement of leaves on the ground could be playful wind or a deadly bloodsucker attack. We had missed this. The tunnel rounded a bend and came out onto a steep riverbank. The road hadn't been finished, and there was certainly no bridge across. Instead, a crane had been used to lay down a brown strip of metal across the gully. It was probably 30 meters long. There was a building on the other side. The darkness of the forest behind it was intensified by the brilliant sun rising even further beyond. "Zoners are out there, somewhere," Defunct said, too loudly. I told him to go back now, but he insisted on crossing the makeshift bridge first. Rho shook their head, then I agreed anyway. I went first, though. Our eyes were on that little building at the far end. There were no lights, but a door was open on the side. The second level was surrounded by a grated walkway, and it was easy to mistake the motion of the trees behind it for something crawling closer. We got halfway across, then 2/3. We'd trodden in it thoroughly by then. Lights came on and figures arose from their stomachs at the end of the bridge. "Stop and surrender!" a voice shouted. There were 3 men on that walkway all of a sudden, armed. 3 more were behind us. "Fuck!" Defunct remarked. I agreed, and advised we do whatever they say. They had us leave our rifles on the ground and walk the rest of the way over the bridge under close watch. There was a road here of ancient construction, cobbles and weeds. The ambushers took our bags and pulled us into the house. It was a single room on each floor. The downstairs was painted blue and filled with chairs carved from logs. Upstairs, where they took us, it was bare and white. Up until that point, I thought it was the invading soldiers accosting us. Then I smelled them. They were definitely stalkers of some veterancy. We'd found the zoners already. In the electric light, they were revealed to be encrusted with mud and dripping with military hardware. They were shouting this and that at us, the upshot of which was that we had to stand in the middle of the room and give an account of ourselves, while they pointed guns at us. Had we been alone, me and Rho that is, I think we would have been fine. However, Defunct was a problem. The zoners recognized his carbon cat's patch, the mark of the enemy. They worded it like he was from the government, which was only a couple of degrees of separation off. They had the names of people killed in the fighting. They, accidentally but rightly, thought I was responsible too, despite the clear sky patch I wore for such diplomatic purposes. "Leave them alone. They're my prisoner," Defunct argued. The Zoners didn't buy this generous offer, as no one in their right mind would have. "I need to speak with the Free Zoners. I guess that's you. I hired this merc to be my bodyguard," I said. This got more traction. They asked who I was, and Rho's name got recognized. The mood burned down a little. "We're here to help you destroy the Brain Scorcher," Rho said. This was the correct thing to say. "Didn't you know this guy slaughtered 3 stalkers, more than once?" a Zoner told me, his weapon pointing to Defunct as the subject of that claim. "No, that's awful," I said. The Zoners agreed. "This is bullshit, he's one of them," someone else suggested. "He's not, let him go," Defunct said, even louder than the Zoners were bellowing. "Shut the fuck up, you're going to die," the angry Zoner stated. "You didn't give us a choice, we were shot at." "Then don't walk up unannounced with platoons of shady fucks," was the quick response. It may have been too quiet for Defunct to catch entirely. I sensed a solution to the argument and entertained it with the smooth touch of one jokingly selling their soul to the heaviest abyss. "He's a criminal, and it's the death sentence," I said, calmest in the room. I got ample confirmation. Rho huffed at me. The abyss had crushed me already, I think. "Stalkers, we're here to do things the Zoner way. You know who we are. Fine. We can do things for you. Let me show you," I said with all my courage. I gave Defunct a look. He probably thought we were going to shoot our way out. He had my Browning stuffed behind his vest, and I had moved the USP into my trousers the moment the hold-up began. "Don't shoot for a second," I politely requested of the room. You know what happened next. I whipped the USP up, jammed it into the side of Defunct's head, and pulled the trigger. Everyone jumped at the noise. He clattered against the railings by the stair and made a mess. I didn't get shot, somehow. The Zoners mumbled things to each other. Rho was unfazed. I held my eyes closed until the welling feeling passed, then said, "You see? Let's keep going then, to the plant." It did everything I needed it to.